You were once everywhere, alive, burning, bleeding effort into every breath. They saw you running, always chasing something, maybe a dream, maybe your worth, maybe just peace. Your name echoed in rooms you never even stepped in. Your fire could warm the coldest eyes. But one day, the flame flickered, and then it vanished. You didn't disappear because you were weak. You disappeared because survival demanded silence, because the world wasn't offering rest. It was offering war. And you were already bleeding. So you went dark, not out of defeat, but out of design. Because some storms are not meant to be watched. They are meant to be endured. And when the soul is collapsing under the weight of unseen grief, the greatest form of strength is withdrawal. But the world doesn't understand that, does it? They called you a ghost, said you vanished like a coward, mocked your silence, laughed at your absence. They didn't know what the darkness was doing to you, or what it was doing for you. They saw you disappear, but they never saw why. Because no one sees the collapse before the rebuild. No one studies the roots when the tree falls. They just walk by the ashes and assume the forest was weak. But they forget. Some forests burn themselves down on purpose. Because beneath every layer of charred bark, beneath every scar that once screamed in green, beneath every fallen leaf is the seed of something stronger, something that learned. That's what you became in the dark, a forest shedding its leaves, collapsing in silence, so it could rise again, unrecognizable. You were never gone. You were becoming. They don't teach that in schools. They don't praise that on stages. But the greatest transformations don't happen under the spotlight. They happen in the shadows, in bedrooms where no one checks in moments where the heart is breaking and no one's listening, in long nights where you whisper to yourself, "Don't quit." And you didn't. You broke. You bled. But you didn't quit. That's why your disappearance isn't a story of weakness. It's a story of resurrection. Because the real you wasn't born in applause. The real you was born when your tears touched the ground and no one wiped them. When you stared at your ceiling at 3 a.m. and asked God why it all hurts and got no answer and still chose to wake up the next day. That's where legends are forged. They said you vanished. They were right. You did vanish. You left behind a version of you that begged for permission, that feared being misunderstood, that needed validation to breathe. You walked into the shadows, carrying only your brokenness and your will. And in that silence, the world forgot your name. But that's exactly where you found yourself. Because when the noise is gone, the masks fall off, you see your own face for the first time. And it's terrifying and liberating. You disappeared not to escape life, but to learn how to face it differently, with sharper eyes, stronger bones, a quieter soul, a louder purpose. They thought you faded, but the truth, you were rewriting the script in ink no one else could read. You were carving scars into stories. You were bleeding truths into silence. You weren't gone. You were cocooning. And now they'll see you, but not the version they remember. Because when a ghost returns, it doesn't come back to explain. It comes back to dominate. This wasn't just a fall. It was a burial. You didn't just lose your grip. The ground you trusted gave out beneath you. No warning, no signal, just silence, then impact. But you didn't land on a floor. No, you kept falling, down beneath what you thought was rock bottom, through the cracks of your own soul. Past the memories that once held you together. You weren't sleeping. You were sinking. People asked where you went, but they never looked deep enough to find the answer. Because where you were light didn't reach. That's the part no one talks about. Not just the pain, not just the loss, but the moment when your own reflection becomes a stranger, when your thoughts turn against you, when silence gets so loud it drowns your own heartbeat. You didn't fall into darkness. You fell into yourself, and that's the deepest pit of all. The one built from your own doubts, your own regrets, your own betrayals. They think pain comes from the outside, but some of the worst wounds are carved by your own hand. You didn't just disappear. You started unraveling from the inside out, piece by piece, layer by layer, until you didn't recognize your own voice in the mirror anymore. The smiles you used to fake. Gone. The fire you once faked. Extinguished. Your mind became your battlefield, and you were both the soldier and the war. Do you know what it's like to be haunted by your own mind? To have nightmares louder than dreams? To look forward to sleep and still wake up tired from fighting yourself all night? That's not rest. That's mental warfare. And that's where the villains showed up. They weren't outside. They weren't wearing faces or names. They were shadows inside your own ribs. Doubt whispering that you'll never rise again. Fear showing you fake futures painted in failure. Betrayal reminding you of the ones who said forever and left. Time laughing as it passed without healing you. You became your own prison, and there were no keys, no heroes, no soundtrack. Just survival. Silent survival. Breath by breath. Tear by tear. And the worst part? The world kept spinning. It didn't wait. Didn't ask. Didn't care. You were gone and nobody noticed. Your seat at the table went cold. Your messages stopped buzzing. Your name slipped from lips like dust. The world forgot you. And then, worse, you forgot yourself. You forgot what your laugh sounded like. Forgot how it felt to walk into a room without bracing for impact. Forgot what hope felt like in your lungs. You weren't living. You were drifting. A ghost not just to them, but to yourself. You started questioning everything. Why me? What did I do wrong? What if this is who I really am? You started replaying conversations, mistakes, choices, obsessing over forks in the road that can't be unwalked, wishing for do-overs in a world that only plays forward. This wasn't a chapter. It was a graveyard of all the versions of you that didn't make it. And yet, you were still breathing. Barely, but breathing. And in the stillness, something strange happened. You started to hear your real voice, the one buried under the noise, the one that had been drowned by applause, criticism, pressure. A faint whisper, a flicker of rebellion, a heartbeat inside the dirt. Because even in the fall, even in the silence, even in the damn burial, a part of you refused to die. And that part, that sliver of light in your soul's darkest hour, that is the seed of everything to come. You weren't dead. You were watching, silent, still, somewhere in between memory and myth. This was the ghost phase, where you walked among the living, but felt more like smoke than skin. Unnoticed, uncelebrated, untouchable. People stopped calling your name, not because they didn't remember you, but because they assumed you were no longer part of the story. And that's the cruel beauty of this phase. You're everywhere, but you're treated like you don't exist. You enter rooms and they don't look twice. You speak and your words fall like dust on the floor. Your presence? It drips through the cracks like fog no one wants to feel. But ghosts see everything. Because when no one looks at you, you finally get to observe without performance. You hear what they really say behind closed doors. You see who claps when you fall. You watch how quickly they replace you. And you memorize the silence, not as pain, but as fuel. You were never idle. You were training in silence, in the shadows, in the corners no spotlight reaches. You were sharpening your edges, building muscle they couldn't see, rewiring your mind when they thought it was broken. Because ghosts don't just haunt. Ghosts learn. They study the patterns, the betrayals, the systems, the fake smiles, the real enemies. And while they sleep, while they scroll, mock, forget, you're loading the storm. They thought your stillness meant surrender, that your absence meant the fire was out. They didn't realize you were learning the wind, reading the terrain, building thunder inside your ribs. You were learning to speak with your actions, to move without needing applause, to become unbreakable in the same space where you were shattered. And that's what they'll never understand. You had to become a ghost. So you could become a legend because the old you needed validation, needed recognition, needed to be seen to feel real. But now you know the truth. Power doesn't need a stage. And greatness doesn't announce itself. It arrives. You were invisible, yes. But invisibility isn't weakness. It's freedom. You weren't buried. You were hidden by something greater than you. protected from what would have destroyed you prematurely, because the world doesn't deserve every version of you. Some versions are meant to be earned. So you stayed quiet, watched in silence. Let them forget. Let them doubt. Let them mislabel your pause as a permanent ending. And through it all, you kept your hand on the sword, your back to the wall, your eyes open, your pulse steady. Because even ghosts can bleed. Even ghosts can train. And when the time is right, ghosts return, but not with apologies, not for closure, not to explain what happened in the dark. They return with storm behind their eyes, and fire in their footsteps. They return with silence behind them, and shockwaves ahead. They talk like they know, like they understand where you've been. They point fingers, whisper judgments, make assumptions from the safety of comfort. But they don't know. They have no idea. They don't know the hell you crawled through just to stand here. They didn't see the version of you curled up on a floor, shaking in silence, trying to breathe through a panic attack that came out of nowhere and never left. They didn't hear the late-night sobs, the kind that come without warning, the ones that choke you mid-sentence and leave your pillow soaked with secrets you couldn't say out loud. They didn't know you had days where getting out of bed felt like lifting a mountain, where brushing your teeth was a win, where making it to tomorrow felt like asking too much. No, they don't know, because you didn't tell them, because the few times you tried, they changed the subject, or gave you advice instead of presence. Or worse, they used your pain against you, so you went silent. But silence wasn't surrender. Silence was self-defense. You locked your pain in a vault, buried your heartbreak where no one could reach it, and wore a mask so convincing even you started to believe it. But here's what they'll never understand. They judge the silence, but they don't know the screams. They don't know what it cost you to survive. They don't know what you had to let die in order to keep breathing. They don't know how many people betrayed you. The ones who swore they'd stay but left when the storm rolled in. The ones who said, "I got you," then vanished when you finally reached for them. You learned how to carry your own weight because no one offered hands. You learned how to wipe your own tears because no one noticed they were falling. That kind of pain ages the soul, but it also toughens the spirit. Every betrayal became a brick. Every lie, a lesson. Every abandonment, a spark. And brick by brick, tear by tear, you built a version of you no one can break. They don't know how you've died 1,000 invisible deaths, how every setback buried a piece of who you used to be, until all that was left was this. You, wounded but breathing, shattered but standing, alone but awake, and for the first time aware. Aware that not everyone deserves your heart. Aware that not every room deserves your energy. Aware that the world doesn't reward your effort. It tests your endurance. They'll never know that while they were sleeping peacefully, you were bargaining with your own demons just to see the next sunrise. You screamed into the dark, and the only one who answered was you. You became your own savior, your own motivation, your own emergency contact, your own home. And they don't know what it took to do that, because you never made a scene. You didn't beg. You didn't post about it. You didn't break down in public for sympathy points. You broke in silence and rebuilt in shadows. So now when you rise, don't explain. Don't justify. Don't tell your story to people who weren't strong enough to stay during the worst chapter. Let them wonder. Let them talk. Let them misunderstand. Because you know the truth. And that truth, you didn't come this far to be understood. You came this far to become undeniable. You didn't rise in the light. You rose in the dark. No applause. No spotlight. No one clapping for your comeback. Because no one even knew you were coming back. They thought you were finished. But that's the thing about darkness. It doesn't just destroy. It builds. While they slept. While they laughed. You bled. While they moved on, you stayed still, not stuck, but sharpening. You were rebuilding yourself in secret. Every rep, every breath, every breakdown was a brick. Not for a tombstone, but for a throne. You didn't need permission. You needed pressure. Because pressure builds the kind of strength comfort never will. They forgot you. Good. You needed the silence. You needed the distance. You needed to become someone so dangerous that your name alone would rattle their bones when you finally return. Like a lion born in a cage, you paced. You learned the walls. You counted your failures like claws. You bit steel bars and sharpened your teeth against the very things that tried to trap you. Because someday, those bars would bend. Someday, that cage would crack. And when it did, you wouldn't just walk out. You would roar. But this wasn't rage. This was resurrection. It didn't look like fire. It looked like stillness, the kind of stillness that comes right before the storm, the kind of stillness that terrifies those who know what silence really means. Because silence is what happens when a soul stops begging and starts building, when a heart stops breaking and starts beating like war drums, when a ghost stops haunting and starts hunting, your mind sharpened, your body calloused, your spirit untouchable. This was no longer recovery. This was ascension. You didn't climb back. You grew back from the ashes, from the dirt, from the same pain that was supposed to bury you. And there it was, that moment, small, quiet, but undeniable. The moment you looked in the mirror, and your eyes didn't look tired anymore. They looked ready, and a whisper rose from somewhere deep within. I was never meant to stay dead, not in soul, not in purpose, not in identity. The real you was forged in that fire, in those lonely hours, in those nights where sleep never came, but the strength to try again somehow did. The real you isn't soft anymore, not fragile, not desperate. The real you is dangerous now, not because you want revenge, but because you're no longer afraid to become everything they tried to destroy. They thought they buried you, but you weren't in a grave. You were in the womb of something greater. And now, you're not just alive again. You're reborn. You thought you were healing, but you weren't. You were forging. This wasn't therapy. This was alchemy. This wasn't self-care. This was self-construction. Pain was your forge. Silence your steel. You stood in the heat of everything meant to break you, and instead of falling apart, you started to melt into form. Every scar, a blueprint. Every betrayal, a hammer. Every disappointment, a fire blast to your will. You weren't healing. You were becoming a weapon. The kind of weapon they only build in the dark. The kind of weapon born out of necessity, not design. The kind that remembers everything. Every insult. Every fake friend. Every moment they turned their back on you. But not for revenge. For fuel. Because you didn't need to get even. You needed to get invincible. And that's exactly what you did. Now you're not the same person who vanished. You're not soft anymore, not desperate, not waiting for someone to save you. You're your own storm now. You walk differently, not loud but undeniable. Your silence doesn't scream anymore. It commands. Your presence doesn't beg anymore. It penetrates. And the best part? They won't recognize you. And that's the point. Because the person they underestimated, you buried them. Because the version of you they dismissed, you outgrew them. Because the ghost they thought was gone for good, that ghost learned how to wield fire. So now, when they see you, they'll blink twice. Try to recall. Try to figure out where they've seen those eyes before. But they haven't. Because those eyes have seen hell and never closed again. This is the shift. From soft to steel. From broken to bulletproof. From rejected to resurrected. You are no longer available for who you used to be. You are no longer digestible by those who once consumed your energy and left you empty. You are weaponized, focused, refined, and not for destruction, but for domination. You don't swing wildly. You strike with purpose. You don't scream to be heard. You whisper and watch the world lean in. You don't fight for approval anymore. You exist above it, because true power doesn't show off. It radiates. This isn't a comeback. This is a coronation. You don't walk in like someone who wants to be seen. You walk in like someone who doesn't need to explain why they left, or who they became while they were gone. The rooms you once feared, now they feel too small. The people you once chased, now they shrink in your presence. You used to speak with caution. Now you speak with gravity. You used to avoid eye contact. Now your gaze burns straight through excuses. Because you didn't come back for attention, you came back with authority. You came back like a storm returning to a dry sky. Not to ask for space, but to command it. You don't ask to sit at the table anymore. You build your own. And if they don't show up, you eat alone in silence, like a king. Because silence doesn't mean weakness anymore. It means presence. It means power that doesn't need to shout. It means pain that's been transformed into posture. It means you no longer owe the world an explanation. Because you disappeared like a ghost, but you walk in now like a legend. And the irony? They don't recognize you. Good. They're not supposed to. They expected your return to look familiar. Same voice, same softness, same apologies stitched into every word. But what they see now is someone carved from darkness, wearing stillness like armor, and walking with the poise of someone who's already bled enough to stop caring about opinions. They remember who you were, but you're not that person anymore. You're a collection of lessons they never had to learn. You're a monument built from every time you were told you weren't enough. You're unrecognizable for a reason, because that's what rebirth looks like. That's what happens when you die quietly in the world's ignorance and come back with fire behind your name. You reclaim your space, not by fighting, but by existing differently. Your walk is slower now. Your words fewer. But your energy? It screams. Because power doesn't have to ask. It doesn't have to convince. It just walks in and changes the temperature of the room. That's what you are now. Undeniable presence. You don't chase respect anymore. You embody it. And every eye that turns when you enter isn't reacting to noise. It's reacting to the weight of who you've become. This isn't about proving them wrong anymore. That was the old mission. The emotional one, the loud one, the one fueled by pain and ego. But now it's about proving yourself, right? Because you don't need their apology. You don't need their recognition. You don't need their memory. You need your own permission, your own fire, your own discipline in the dark. And for that, you go to war. Not with fists, not with rage, but with purpose sharpened like a blade. This is a war of one. You against every lie you were told. You against every delay, every detour, every voice that whispered, "You're not enough." You against the version of yourself that almost settled. This is personal now, because nobody's coming to save you. Nobody's carrying your purpose but you. And if you don't move, if you don't bleed for your own mission, the world will bury you again. Let them talk. Let them laugh. Let them try to forget. But don't let them forget who rose. Don't let them forget the way you disappeared and returned like you'd swallowed every storm that ever tried to drown you. You want to be a legend? Then burn your excuses. You want to rise? Then stop whispering reasons and start screaming execution. You want to be remembered? Then don't just survive the pain. Use it. Make your heart break your hammer. Make your setbacks your sword. Make your past your pressure plate and ignite your legend. There's no time left for comfort, no space for softness, no room for delay. Because the crown doesn't wait for convenience. It waits for conviction. You either want it more than the resistance, or you fold like they expect you to. And the truth is, no one's watching you anymore. Not like before. Not like when they thought your failure was entertaining. You're not on display now. You're in combat. Internal combat. Spiritual combat. Mental warfare. And no one can fight it but you. So grab your chest. Feel your heartbeat. That's your war drum. That's your reminder that you still have a say. You still have a shot. So what now? Will you keep telling your story like a victim? Or will you write a new one with blood in the ink and purpose in the stroke? You don't need another quote. You need a decision. To get up. To stay up. To level up. Not for them. Not even for revenge. But because your future is worth the fight your present doesn't want to give. This is your moment. This is your war. And you are enough weapon to win it. You don't walk the way you used to. You don't move like someone looking for approval. You move like you own the air in the room. You don't knock anymore. You arrive. You don't ask. You become. Because now you walk by a different code. The old you explained everything, apologized for existing too loudly, watered yourself down for the comfort of the insecure. But that version burned. And from the ashes came the new law, not written in ink, but carved into your spine, forged into your stride, echoing in every word you now choose not to say. You don't chase anymore. You pull. You don't beg for attention. You magnetize respect without lifting a finger. You don't explain your transformation. You embody it. And what was once broken now commands presence. You are not here to fit in. You're here to redefine the room. No more shouting to be heard. Now, I don't speak to be heard. I exist to be remembered. This is the code now. Silence is strategy. You don't share everything. They don't need to know the process, only the result. Energy is currency. You invest it where it multiplies. You no longer bleed for people who won't even clap for your healing. Time is sacred. You don't waste it on explanations, apologies, or attempts to convince small minds of your worth. You used to fight for belonging. Now, you walk like you were never meant to blend in. You used to flinch when people doubted you. Now you smile because their doubt is your reminder of how far you've come. They don't know the fire it took to be this still, the wars it took to wear this calm. But that's the new law. You don't need to be understood. You only need to be unshakable. And the world? It can't measure you anymore because you're not operating on their metrics. You don't live for applause. You live by alignment. You walk with power because you've suffered with purpose. You speak less, but when you do, the earth listens because your voice now carries weight, not volume. Weight. Your posture tells stories. Your silence delivers sermons. Your scars whisper lessons no crowd could ever teach. And that's the difference now. You don't need to announce your comeback. You are the consequence of being underestimated. You are the proof of what happens when the forgotten rise. And now, you are the storm that moves without sound. You walk by the law of fire and stillness, presence and precision, intensity without noise. You are not here to be liked. You are here to be remembered. You're not a ghost anymore. You're not the whisper behind the curtain. You're not the shadow they forgot to look for. You're not trying to explain. You're not trying to convince. You're not even trying to win. Because you've already won. You became the thing they swore you'd never be. Not loud, not angry, but unshakable. The ghost, he's dead. And what stands in his place? A legend. Not the kind carved in stone, but the kind burned into memory. The kind no one talks about without lowering their voice. The kind that doesn't need to return because their absence shakes the ground. You were born in shadows, but made to blind the world with your rise. They never saw it coming, because they never imagined someone could suffer that much and still stand taller than ever before. You didn't come back to be accepted. You came back to own your name. And not just your name, but your silence, your scars, your story. Every second they looked away was another second you built something undeniable, because you weren't just rebuilding a life. You were building a legend. Legends don't chase. They lead. Legends don't ask. They claim. Legends don't fade. They echo. And now you walk with something no one can give you. Authority born in agony. Confidence birthed in chaos. Power crafted in pain. They can't touch you anymore because what you became can't be explained. It can only be felt. When you enter a room now, silence follows. When you speak, the earth pauses. When you leave, they still feel you. And that is legend status, not because you said you were a legend, but because you lived like one. You walked through fire and didn't melt. You vanished and didn't die. You rose and never looked back. You don't need a monument. You are the monument. Every scar, a signature. Every silence, a sentence. Every setback, a step up the mountain they said you'd never climb. And now, you don't shout. You just move. You don't chase legacy. You become the kind that haunts time itself. And when they ask, where did he go? Tell them he disappeared again. But this time he left his legend behind.